Welcome to Rail Fans. I'm Shane Seguin. Join us as we discover Ottawa's O train and Montreal's metro system together. Welcome to Rail Fans Canada. I'm Shane Seguin. Joining me today, David Bellerive and Terence Johnson from Transport Action Canada, who is the president of that advocacy group. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Good afternoon,
as always. Oh, that's a good start.
So today we're going to be talking about a very important topic in Canada right now, the VIA Rail Canada high-frequency rail project. And that has been something discussed for over 2 years now, for quite a long time, but we're finally seeing some action in the past 2 years. Originally, we had news, I think it was summer 2021, where the minister actually made some big announcements about it, how it was going to revolutionize rail transportation for passengers in Canada. And we've had some more interesting news in the past couple months, which sort of lends a bit of pause and concern over what will actually come to be. So starting off from the beginning, I want to iterate that obviously VIA Rail Canada is the passenger rail service intercity and cross-country in Canada. They operate on, or I should say it this way, 98% approximately percent of the track that VIA Rail operates on is shared with freight rail operators. So for example, CN or CP Rail. So they only really own 2% of that track that they actually use. And what that creates is a situation where VIA Rail trains have to share it with freight lines. If there's a freight train or the scheduling isn't accurate or there's a delay, it will seriously impact the service, the reliability, the quality of the product that VIA Rail is delivering. It also contributes to longer trip times. It can contribute to disruptions where, okay, the train stopped at Belleville and that was pretty much it because there's a freight train that derailed up ahead, or, well, maybe not derailed, but there's an issue or it broke down. Any number of things that can happen. High frequency rail, the biggest part of that is there'll be dedicated rails installed, especially in the corridor. So between Windsor and Quebec City, that would allow VIA Rail to operate at potentially higher speeds, more frequently, and with shorter trip times. And hopefully with better comfort because the rails are newer, better maintained, optimized for passenger rail comfort. Terry, let's start off with you. So what about high frequency rail would really make this project successful, and what would it do to get people on board with taking rail transit in Canada?
Okay, so you've really hit the nail on the head with what the base case for doing high frequency rail is, which is to untangle everything, is to get the VIA Rail trains heading from Toronto towards Ottawa and Montreal off of shared track as soon as possible. If, because a lot of things are under wraps, a lot of things we're not being told. If the original plan is followed, the VIA Rail trains would head out of Union Station up the Don Valley, follow CP's alignment through Agincourt, which that does have some contention with freight. And of course, again, we don't know what the solution to that is. Then once you pass Agincourt Yard, you off to Peterborough and Havelock. That's currently a freight line that's very little used. And then from Havelock to Glantay would be reinstated. Glantay to Smith Falls would run alongside CP's freight line. Smith Falls to Ottawa is already VIA. VIA to Ottawa to Coteau is already VIA. And then from Coteau to Montreal, you'd be back on shared track. Then the original plan was to go through the Mount Royal Tunnel and really quickly get to the North Shore and be straight out on the North Shore and zip along the North Shore. Currently, the Quebec-Gatineau Railway, leased from CP, and then hit Quebec City on the north side, and thus avoid the big circuitous route through Saint Foy as well. Now, of course, the Mount Royal Tunnel has now been ruled out. That is one of the things that we were told by the Minister of Transport this March, is that they are ruling it out. What we aren't being told is why, because there was a study that was conducted by Sistra and VIA Rail, We would love to see the actual results of that study as to what is the engineering reason that that what we were told in 2015, 2016, oh yes, it's going to work, now doesn't work. But you've hit the nail on the head. By untangling the services, the HFR trains would be much more reliable. VIA would be free to run at least an hourly service, and the trip time, certainly between Toronto and Ottawa, would plummet because you're not taking a dog leg at Brockville. You're going pretty much direct, and as a result, although the trip time from Toronto to Montreal would be the same as today's fastest trip time, that is not the same because it's every hour, and it's reliable. You don't have to say, okay, well, I think I'm going to get to Montreal at 5 o'clock, but I'm not going to plan anything until about 9 o'clock just in case,
So, David, what do you think about the prospect of HFR? What really entices you? Because I know that you're a big supporter of VIA Rail as well.
Yeah, it's hurtful to say, it feels, I hate seeing it, but I really wish HFR was done earlier, sooner, and in the way VIA Rail proposed it at first, because as Terry says, there's so many questions they're not willing to answer, and there's so many, even just with the procurement information we have so far, it's a project that seems to be just looking for this, it seems to be headed towards a disaster that's going to be ready way too late for probably way too much money. The Montreal tunnel is probably the big missing piece that they're really obviously for me, most of my travels was and is between Ottawa and Quebec City. That's where I grew up. That's where my family is. So that's most of the time when I ride VIA Rail is that segment. So I'm a bit biased. I want to see HFR obviously all the way through Quebec, but something tells me that we're more and more that things will advance, and less it will be enticing of a project as it is. And as you both say, it's really important for VIA Rail to increase frequency. That's how you get people on board. Frequent, reliable service is the key. Is the key to passenger rail in Canada, because even if we cannot increase speed, we cannot increase frequency right now with the tracks we have. We really depend on CPCN and Metrolinx in the GTA to operate on their tracks for VIA Rail. So we're kind of stuck in a corner, if I can put it this way. What I think though, and I hate to say it because I've been pretty vocal, I think, about how much I want VIA Rail to succeed. I want VIA Rail to have all the opportunities and tools they need to be for people to take. I'll take the train first before thinking of I'll drive or I'll take the plane, because both options are not viable in the long term. And to me, it's kind of like a farce at this point. I want projects to improve passenger rail in Canada, but at what cost? And I think that's the big worry I have right now with HFR and the way it's proposed.
So if we go back a little bit, over a year and a half, 2 years ago, the minister at the time made the announcement that they were going to be moving ahead with HFR. It seemed like a project that within a couple years' time, we would see this in place, operating, we'd see advantage and improvement. And then I believe earlier this year, they said that they were going to be handing out the procurement. And I don't want to say it wrong here, but I mean, it's as if you're piecemealing off VIA Rail, the corridor service, to a private operator, and they're going to build it. It's sort of the same idea as, let's say, the REM in Montreal. That's not the kind of approach you want to have for a national intercity. Maybe that approach works fine in let's say, a city like Montreal or Ottawa or Toronto, if you were to do something like that. But something that's crossing the country, something that's going between provinces, between cities, it can create issues with, I'm assuming, it'll have some effect on the price that people will pay potentially to use the service. It'll affect the kind of service that's offered. They're going to be probably free to operate it as they wish. Even if it's a high frequency rail, it might not be all that high frequency. It could still be slow. There's any number of things that are lost in translation at that point. The government VIA Rail are really going to be giving up a lot of control. And what we see, even if we draw an analogy to Toronto, the Highway 407 ETR, that's not even, it's a provincial highway that's not even owned or operated by the province. Let's say that corporation operates it. They charge whatever they want. You never see any cars using it. What does that tell you? I've used it. I didn't know how much it was going to cost at the end of the day, but there's reasons why people don't use it. And now the government has their hands tied. Terry, what do you think about the current proposal, and how is this going to tie things up?
So something changed between 6th of June 2021 and March this year. Because when Omar El-Gabra made his announcements in June 2021, he was really talking about starting the process for the environmental assessment and things like that in the fall. It assumed that the project would be, it sounded as though the project had been given a highball. Then we have the election. Okay, you have to put everything on hold in the election. Those are the rules. After the election, everything stays on hold. And then in March, we have this request for expressions of interest of the private sector. And suddenly the entire corridor is in scope, including what they're calling the local services, which is everything that VIA currently runs in the corridor. And the terms of the procurement are potentially having a partner operate all of this for 30 to 50 years. Now, there are some similarities here to the way GO's on-corridor works, GO expansion is being procured. In many ways, some of those things could potentially be good. They are looking at bringing in private sector expertise to say, okay, we have a base case. Can we expand upon the base case? Can we do it cheaper? Can we do it faster? Can we run faster trains, etc. But GO did not outsource revenue risk.
Exactly.
You're still going to be riding a GO train operated by Metrolinx, paying a GO fare. The idea of outsourcing revenue risk is absolutely horrifying to me as somebody who comes from the United Kingdom and has seen that this goes two ways. Either somebody underbids the contract and it collapses, as the East Coast franchise in the UK did twice because the contract had been underbid, or they overbid the contract, make a ton of money, fares are too high. Both ways, the taxpayer and the passenger lose. There are only two scenarios, and in both of them, the taxpayer and the passenger lose.
There's always a middleman that wants to make some money in there. That's what we're doing basically at this point.
The thing is, you're asking for a prediction of what passenger ridership in the corridor might be in 2050 or 2060, or even at the outside 2080. That's 50 years from the day the thing opens, which wouldn't be until potentially the end of this decade at the rate things are going. The city of Peterborough has a strategic plan through 2030. But if the city of Peterborough suddenly has high-frequency rail that's as good as it's made out to be, the population of Peterborough is going to change dramatically. Is that population change through densification, through transit-oriented development, or is it sprawl? Because if it's sprawl, it has a different effect on ridership. We do not know. We literally do not know. A lot of the base numbers that you have to be able to plug into a model to say what your ridership might be. And so many of them depend on other factors, like how good is the GO network? How good is the EXO/REM network? How good does the Ottawa LRT network become that are going to feed this trunk? The trunk is only as strong as the branches. The branches are only as strong as the trunk. But to try and silo off the trunk and say, right, we're going to ask some private sector consortium to take on this risk that is tied into public policy of 3 levels of government over the next 50 years. We're going to ask you to take a bet on public policy of 3 levels of government in Canada over the next 50 years. Excuse me, who should take that bet?
I hope there's no consortiums, I'm sorry to say, but stupid enough to take on that bet, because it's not like, it's not going to be a favorable deal for anyone in the end. Like when you ask people to take such a gamble on the long term, and there's no guarantee that I hate saying that, but like you say, if the branches are not good, like no one's going to use the trunk anyway. So we've seen like the airlines have dominated those routes for forever at this point, like in the grand scheme of things. But like we need a revolution for people to be convinced it's worthwhile. And if you have a private partner that, well, they will bid a certain amount and they will be offered the rights to operate and revenue on the routes based on that number, they're in there to recover their costs. They're not in there to make a profit. They're not in there just to offer a service to Canadians. And I think that's something that gets lost in translation with that whole project. It's not
when you move from a service motive to a profit motive, and the way things are run, you're going to have challenges. And in Europe, you're seeing European governments say, right, we're not going to allow competing flights with rail, where rail is frequent and within a given time limit. It actually doesn't make a lot of sense to go and queue up at the airport and squeeze yourself onto a plane. It would be quicker to go on the train. So we're going to push this and say let's go on the electrified train, and that is one of the good things that has been confirmed over the last couple of years, is that they are determined to electrify high frequency rail. I say it's a good thing with a little bit of a caveat, because the original vision was that this would be built by now, and then we would electrify it. So the bit which actually the Canadian railway industry knows how to do, which is building the track, will be done first, and the bit which the Canadian railway industry is figuring out, and the team at Alstom and everybody else who's involved in the On-Corridor Works program are figuring out, is how are we going to deliver this massive amount of electrification in Toronto. And they're bringing in a lot of international expertise to do it, and that's going to be necessary. And the electrification is really welcome. It's needed. It will make things faster, cleaner, quieter, etc. But we do have to recognize that the actual engineering expertise in this field is lagging in North America, because we've had 40 years of lagging investment.
I mean, if someone wants an example of that, just look at the California high-speed rail. It's a project that has a lot of challenge. I think it's a really great project overall, but we've seen it in how it's being implemented. They're facing most of their challenge are because that expertise has not been in North America in forever. It's a reality. We have to outsource a lot of those skills nowadays, but it's also it would be an excellent opportunity for Canada to develop its own expertise in electrification, high-speed rail, and other things. There's market over the next century. That's going to be where I think the meat of the game is going to be for electrification, because you see it for not just passenger rail, by the way, also for freight transport. It makes sense to go towards electrification.
Well, this is the thing which is actually a huge challenge that the government has not taken on, is that at the moment it's being taken as table stakes that when you're sharing track with freight, you're not going to be able to put up catenary. That's really problematic for GO, because, for example, you get to Burlington, you want to go all the way to Hamilton, but you get to Burlington, you're on CN's tracks. And then there's other parts of the GO network where you're sharing with freight. And there are countries around the world that are running catenary above double stack freight trains without any problems. India's doing it. And the result is the freight is electrified. The freight moves faster. You have fewer supply chain difficulties if your logistics system is faster and electrified. But that bullet is not being bitten. And honestly, the cost of doing dual mode, doing hybrid, is quite high, and then you've got to lug the power plant around with you when you are running under the wires. And so it's how do we, what's the easiest way to solve this? Is actually to say, right, there's going to be a quid pro quo here for electrification where we are sharing the track. The other thing that is very odd about this change of tack to include all the existing services in the corridor is that it comes before making any kind of regulatory changes that might be needed in order to make sure that freight and passenger trains interoperate seamlessly. And so all of the risk that VIA has now would be transferred, not ameliorated. And you need to ameliorate that risk. That is the main problem, to be quite honest, in this country, is that if my train from Chatham, where I live, into Toronto is delayed by a freight train somewhere along the lines or some other circumstances, then we get to Aldershot and we might have missed the slot that we're programmed into on the Metrolinx network. This makes Metrolinx annoyed. It creates a lot of complexity for them. It potentially means we end up holding for several minutes, or we accumulate another 15 minutes of delay before we actually get to Union Station. And it makes it very difficult to say, right, let's sell a ticket from London to Port Credit, and we know that this transfer is going to work perfectly at Aldershot or Oakville. And by transfer work perfectly, I mean a transfer time of like 5 or 10 minutes to the next GO train, not a transfer of 45 minutes to an hour just in case something is going silly.
So like that's a good point, because what we see in Europe is, and Europe, fortunately and unfortunately for us, actually have high speed rail where the trains are going at quite phenomenal speeds, and they operate on schedules where the train, if the train is supposed to leave at 12:05, it leaves at 12:05, maybe 12:06, but that's a rarity. And the train arrives when it says it's supposed to arrive. Here, it's anyone's guess if the train's going to depart on time. It's anyone's guess if it's going to not be held up along the way. And the end result is when you finally get to your destination, you could be 30 minutes, an hour, even more. It's rarely on time. That really throws people off, because then when they're trying to make a connection at the far end, they can't. And another good point that I want to bring up is we've seen a lot of change in Canada's intercity transportation. Greyhound, which was the major provider, has pulled out. What does that leave people? Obviously, you can't take a taxi from Ottawa to Toronto. So there's other bus operators, but there's not like some solid system that's all over the place. This is a great opportunity, especially if HFR had already been in place. They could have stepped up very quickly and said, you know what, we can satisfy this demand, and going to be working to electrify the system. It's going to be green. It's going to be environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
Comfortable. It's smooth.
Okay. I hope you're seeing me fine, because I've seen a bit of jitter at this end. Okay. The real point with high frequency rail, as originally proposed, as a low cost triage solution, use a lot of existing infrastructure, was that because it would actually lead to such a big uptick in ridership and service in the corridor, that would actually have then spin-off benefits for the rest of the country. Because if you think we have problems with lack of bus here, try Western Canada. And they have a massive problem with lack of rail. So the real VIA has another problem, which is that HFR was supposed to be done and dusted before we ran into the situation with the life expiry of the long distance fleet, and now it's not. The HFR was supposed to be coming online when the new fleet was being delivered, and the options in that contract were supposed to be exercised to equip HFR. And there was a lot of ducks that had been put in a row, and the fact the government has taken a very long time to make a decision about HFR, and then changed the way this is being procured from a design build to a design build operate maintain, that adds a lot of complexity, has meant that well organized plan to revitalize the whole of the VIA network is not necessarily now as well organized as it once was. We've been asking the government for several years to let VIA start procurement on long distance fleet, because if they don't start procurement soon, we are going to be in a crisis in this country, even worse than we already are in terms of long distance mobility. The other public policy angle is, if VIA Rail is public sector, then it can be a matter of public policy that you do as much intermodal integration as possible. It no longer is it is in everybody's commercial interests, but you can, as a matter of public policy, say, yeah, we're going to do this thing, and we're actually going to have nudges or regulations in the system that require everybody to play on the same playing field. For example, the Swiss do this. The reason the Swiss transport system works really, really well is that you can buy tickets from anywhere to anywhere across multiple players, and you need to do that in Canada. We're a big country with a lot of different players in the transportation market. Rail does not go everywhere. Even if we did reinstate a lot of the rail service that I'd love to see reinstated, it still doesn't go everywhere. You've got to get to and from the stations. Sometimes that's long distance, and sometimes that's best provided by motor coach operators. So you've got to have everybody at the table. But if you fragment VIA Rail, if you take away its ability to do that, to play that kind of role as the trunk of the whole network from coast to coast, the question becomes, then how are you going to solve this problem?
And it's an annoying question because the answer is, I don't think it's politically popular at this time. And on top of that, I think there's a lot of risk that the government seems to be really willing to end off to a private partner at whatever cost at this point. You mentioned earlier via earlier HFR proposal. Like I remember when in 2019 or 2018, when they came up with the original pitch for HFR, it's going to be built in 4 to 5 years. It's going to cost a couple billions at most. Like we're going to get more Canadians on track, and they were really. In my mind, that was not the project would be talking to be in service by 2030. We're nowhere like at this point. We have the timeline of high-speed rail with none of the and something tells me the price tag is getting closer and closer to high-speed rail. But
yeah, it is. I mean, what was a 4 to 5 billion project, which let's be realistic, was probably 6, is now 12 at least, and
at the very least 12.
Probably heading far north of 12. Depending on depending on how we solve some of the problems that have been created by the delay. I mean, the gold-plated solution in Montreal is a new tunnel. Those aren't cheap. Yes. The Don branch was not in use, was sitting there as a really good way to get high-frequency services that wanted to go fast, untangled from GO trains as soon as possible after leaving Union Station. Now Metrolinx wants to use the Don branch as a layover, which would actually add minimal amounts of utility to dispatching on the Metrolinx network. But if that means that you're actually entangling commuter service and high-speed service for further coming out of Toronto, or you have to make a new alignment, or for example, if you use the Stouffville alignment instead, then you've got to start doing some property taking to build connections that are not there. The great advantage of the Don branch is you didn't have to take anybody's house away to use that and make that for high frequency rail. And so it's like, if the government does not commit and it does not actually start locking down alignments now, the more complicated it gets. The longer you work, more expensive, and the more complicated it gets. And that's what's really worrying here, is that they want this to be perfect first time. And I can tell you, with very large infrastructure projects of this nature, those that have been successful are not the ones where they attempted to do the whole thing perfect first time. They're the ones where they actually got some shovels in the ground, did 80%, did the 80-20, 80% of the benefit, 20% of the cost, and then did the 80-20 again, and then again. So if you look at places like North Carolina, where they've made subsequent incremental investments over the last couple of decades, and now they have quite a good system, and now they're able to look at building on that by reinstating the line from Richmond to towards Washington D.C. that would cut several hours off of the journey, but they're still doing it on the basis of we're building a wall. Each brick builds along the other. We're not trying to magic an entire wall into being in one go. And so it's really worrying And this is the other problem with making it a 30 or 50-year contract, is that because we are then expected to get it all right first time, we could very easily end up in a situation where something isn't right, but the change costs to make it right absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
Now, Terry, I want to come back to you just for a moment. So you've told everybody that you're originally from the UK, and I just want you to just talk briefly what in the UK makes RAIL so successful. Why is it successful? What have they done that it makes it successful and enticing for people?
Okay, so what has made rail successful in the UK, ironically, is that post-privatization, they were willing to throw a lot more money than they had been beforehand.
Yeah.
So even after everybody's had their cut, many, many more billions of pounds were going into infrastructure. Were going into increasing train frequencies. It hasn't been a significant increase in speed. In many cases, it has been an increase in frequency. In some cases, it has been reasonably. In many cases, the investments that have been made have been extremely smart. They've been about untangling the existing network. Building track flyovers at Reading, for example, so that your freight trains going to the Port of Southampton don't have to cut across your passenger trains. And a lot of those investments could have actually happened a lot earlier.
Yeah.
Had the dogma of privatization not actually intervened. I mean, one of the most ridiculous things about privatization is the first thing that happened after privatization is that Virgin Trains bought back, effectively, the technology that had been in the advanced passenger train, but which was cancelled by previous conservative privatization-minded people who didn't think that was what Britain needed and weren't willing to make that investment.
Yeah, with the new with the Pendolino train sets, like nowadays, those trains are exported worldwide. Most of the tilting trains design we see nowadays are built on the design that you can lineage back all the way back to APT and other projects like that were started and pioneered by British Rail before privatization. But someone got trigger happy and decided it was the thing to chop. And like in comparison, I think we see it also.
And the other thing that's been a factor in the UK is that they've completely hit the limit of how many cars you can possibly shove on the island and how many motorways you can build. I know, to be quite honest, it becomes inevitable at a certain point. Now, we don't have that problem apart from around Toronto and Montreal, but we don't want to get to the point where we have that problem either. The other thing that's worth noting is that the lineage of a lot of that technology actually is Canadian. The banking technology in the LRC trains was actually absolutely phenomenal at the time it was created. Yeah. But because we had 40 years of underinvestment, apart from the Acceler Express train in the US, which is also built on that technology, we have not actually in Canada capitalized on the engineering and technology that we did have.
Montreal Locomotive Work was ahead of its time in many fields. Like, I mean, that could be a whole discussion by itself. The lineage of MLW and other trains in North America now. Like even I mean, the UAC two-board train, as much as it was flawed in many regards, and they still managed to get it to work. But even that was like, that's North American. It's a North American design. That's the basis of how they went ahead with iterative design and improvements for many things. And yet here we are just standing still. Like we're the biggest thing we can look forward to right now in VIA Rail is the new trains. I'm really excited for them. I'm really looking for it, but it's not solving any of the problems. The train is a necessary replacement. It's capital spending that needs to happen because the LRT train sets, LRC trains cars are done so or done in so many regards. I mean, even they bankrupted a company that was trying to restore them at some point. I think that if someone wants an idea of how done they are, I think that's a good visualization. And Alstom, I mean, forget about Alstom. Like, even if we just talk Bombardier, like they had what La Pocatière, and they have Thunder Bay. They had Thunder Bay also. Two factories that could have built and designed trains for the Canadian market and like use that expertise to develop a product that would have fit the needs and could have been on the tracks already. But we're still waiting. It's investment, as you say. It's too little investment. I think too late at this point. We're trying to fix everything at once with a solution that's supposed to be right-sized for the next 30, 50 years. It's not just a gamble at this point. It's get the crystal ball and start hoping, because we're not in a realistic world where I don't think that's the model we can follow. I see someone mention OBB in the chat. RailJet, for example, in Europe, I think is, oh my god, I'm blanking out on what OBB stands for. I know it's authorized for something, but RailJet is relatively conventional rail system service, and it's probably, I think for many, it's the benchmark of what passenger rail at a not high speed. Like I'm not even talking high speed rail at this point. Just talking good passenger service. RailJet is probably a benchmark. Deutsche Bahn, they have their issues, but they've been managing quite a few things also on their own with relatively limited resources in some cases. You see it also with SNCF. You see it with the Italians with the Ferro. My Italian's really bad, but their high-speed service. And you mentioned the Swiss. Is there? I think in terms of integration between the freight and passenger service on their tracks that are electrified for the most part, I don't think there's many example much better than that we can look to and use as an inspiration for what to do in Canada. But I guess as you say, like we're going for 100% of the risk, 100% of the objectives, but it's not a smart way to do it.
So I'm just going to put up some. There's been some chatter in the chat so far. So just put up a couple points that people brought up. So Jean-François Mézay has said, we built Montreal-Vancouver tracks in less time than it has taken to study this HFR thing. Where there is a will, there is a way. I mean, it seemed very tangible a year and a half ago, and now it just seems like it's so far away. And somebody else even wrote, it felt like an election promise. And
yeah, I think the issue really is that unless there is a course correction by the federal government, they won't actually get the shovels in the ground before the next federal election, and that's absurd. Even if you trying to do this for political reasons, you cannot go into the next federal election and say, "Oh no, we the thing we promised you 4 years ago, we haven't done it yet." That doesn't work. Exactly. That does not work at the ballot box. So I think there really needs to be evidence of progress on this file very soon, in order in order not to rapidly increase the political risk as well as the engineering risk.
Yeah, and I think you put it quite well that it's not going to sway anyone to think it's a viable policy line, because even the government itself doesn't seem to believe it is. The way they act is, it seems it just protects certain interests, and just to say, well, we've pitched an idea, like we're working on it, but we're not at a point where we need to say we're working on something. We need shovels in the ground. We need to actually commit to building something, even if we were just for the very few sections that VIA Rail actually own. If we were already starting to upgrade those tracks, if we're already working towards at least getting some shovels in the ground to start making a difference, would be better off than we are right now.
There is some good news, which is that there is a set of projects called the Montreal Mobility projects, So that is going to be an upgrade to the station at Dorval, which is much needed.
Overdue,
And
yes.
at least two other fairly major projects in the Montreal area. And this is the announcement the government made about no regret works in front of HFR. So we don't know what the rest of those are. But if, for example, you were to do some work between the Turcot Interchange and Montreal Central Station, you could probably shave 10 minutes off the journey.
Definitely.
And certainly improve the reliability a lot, because that's also a track that is being used heavily by freight to get to the port, to get to the bridge. Yeah. So there's a lot of work that can be done ahead of HFR.
Yes.
If the government is willing to actually say, hey, these 32 new train sets we bought, we want to put them to good use. We want to show people what this can do. Because 32 bidirectional train sets can actually run about twice as many services per day as the 26 consists that were in operation in the corridor in 2019. Only a few of which were able to be bidirectional, because of course the only way it can be done at the moment is with a locomotive at both ends. So there is a huge opportunity to take the investment that's already been made, and for relatively small dollars, up the game a lot.
Definitely, yeah.
And that's especially true in southwestern Ontario, where we know that we're going to be sharing tracks with freight, where we know that any investment we make is going to debottleneck freight too. It's going to be a win-win. And if we can fix southwestern Ontario, we can do something actually amazing, which is we can get rid of this ridiculous situation where Toronto is effectively a terminus station in both directions, and start making it a bit more like New York Penn or even Birmingham New Street, where if you're getting a train from London to Ottawa, you're getting a train from London to Ottawa. You're not getting off and going downstairs for nearly an hour and then coming back up and actually getting on the same equipment, which is actually forming the onward service to Ottawa. You're stopping for maybe 15 minutes in Toronto. If we can do that, it changes the game, because now the delay you have in Toronto to change trains, even though it's actually the same set of equipment making the onward service, is so great. It's actually faster to drive on the stupid 401 through Toronto. That's an achievement, because that drive is absolutely terrible. So if we can actually fix this problem, even before HFR, we can do a game-changing thing in terms of mobility. It was actually quite significant when VIA started running the services that Quebec City, Montreal, Ottawa, where it's the same service diagrammed onwards. It's actually really helped. It picked up ridership. The other thing that picked up a lot of ridership that VIA did between 2015 and 2019 is increase the frequency between Toronto and Ottawa as much as they could, and it's almost hourly. Even though the travel time is still long, that increase in frequency gave people so many more options in their day that ridership shot up. So we can do these things even while we're studying HFR. But the problem is that because there's been so much back and forth, study HFR, ask VIA the questions that actually the engineering studies already answered, is that the management bandwidth to do some of the other incremental improvements that really are low-hanging fruit has been taken up by the government asking more and more questions about HFR and making HFR a lot harder than it ever needed to be.
No, pretty much. Yeah.
So we're going to go to one of the questions here. So Jean-François Mezaille is asking, with CNCP addicted to double stack containers, is electrification ever possible on their tracks? Could they be confined to go to single track or single stacked faster trains? Terry, what do you think?
That's actually two questions. One of them is electrification possible over double stack? Yes, it is. It's totally possible. You do end up in a situation where, of course, the contact wire is higher than it would be for a European electric train, and therefore the dynamics are different. But it is done. The Indians do it. This technology provably exists. Yeah. Is there merit in saying, let's go to single stack containers? Well, that opens a whole can of worms, because a double stack train, of course, is half the length of a single stack train, moving twice as much freight, potentially twice as much revenue. Problem, you get to the terminal, it actually takes you a lot longer to load and unload a double stack train. So the question is, what are you trying to do with freight? If you're trying to do actually really quite rapid logistics, where that terminal dwell time you need to really cut that terminal dwell time to be able to say to your customer, yes, that box of that box of stuff for Walmart or Amazon is going to be ready just in time. Then more frequent, faster, single stack, maybe that makes sense. There was an experiment that CP did for a number of years where they were doing a piggyback train in the corridor, try and take some trucks off of Highway 401. Problem, it only ran once a day. That didn't give you the kind of flexibility that you get out some of these services in Europe that do the same thing, but they're running every 15 minutes or more. If you want to get a truck through the Alps, for example, putting it on a piggyback train is a great way to do it. If you want to get a truck across the Pyrenees, there's a piggyback train for that, but it runs more than once a day. And of course, the Channel Tunnel is case in point, because it's really by far the best option is to use piggyback. But it really is roll on, roll off, and it's pretty much turn up and go, or at least it was before the political changes around Brexit made a bit of a mess of things. And that's what rail can do. And North American rail does not do that, and that's an economic choice, and it's a policy choice.
Yeah. It's also worth adding, like CN and CP, their main, and I think we can apply to most Class 1 operators in North America. Their goal is to get freight. Like they're more focused on long haul freight more than what we would. I don't want to say last mile kind of trips, but and that's a big difference. Maybe you might. We can see with the Swiss. So like I love using the Swiss as an example for freight service, but we see it in Europe. Like freight trains, they're used more for also shorter distance routes. We don't, so there's not a need for mile long trains like we can see here with hundreds of wagons and containers. So it's really a policy. It's also an approach. It's a business model for each of those operators. The reality is that most of the freight operators in North America rely on precision timing per se for their. It's really optimized in getting a long train a long way, as relatively fast per se for freight. And just to add on, Jean-François mentioning that double stack is not half the length. It depends if you look at, it depends which double stack freight cars you look at. In North America, yes, most of them will have the bogies further out, so your double stack is technically a bit lower, but that's mostly due with how the tunnels were built in many parts of the country. They're not built well. Yeah.
It's slightly more than half the length because you actually have more space between the containers, but largely speaking, it's much more economical to run double stack than it is to run single stack, and that's why it's happening, especially over large distances. What is the future of logistics in the corridor? Well, you have to look at what's happening on Highway 401 and the other highways. Well, there's actually loads and loads of truck movements that are going quite long distances, and for some reason that's competitive, and for some reason the railways are leaving that money on the table.
Exactly.
And it's like, is there an opportunity to decarbonize, to decrease the cost of doing business, to speed up our supply chains, to make our supply chains more resilient? Or do all those things exist? And if they do, is there a way to actually align the economic incentives so it makes sense for CN and CP to do it?
Yeah, that's another old ball game, though.
Now we'll go to the next question from Simha. Thoughts on Montreal to Saint-Jean-Richelieu train? A stop on the Montreal New York City trip would be good.
I think the reason, like I'm blanking out on the exact details of that route, but I think the reason why there's not a stop before they get to the U.S. border is because they clear customs in Montreal. If I recall, I might be blanking out, or
it's not happening yet. It's supposed to happen. That's one of the big questions that's been going on for many years, and now the enabling legislation actually exists on both sides of the border to have pre-clearance in Montreal, which can save you an hour sitting around at the border especially in the middle of winter, which is good. The caveat to that is the way border control is done at the moment, then you can't have intermediate stops, which in case of Montreal, it's not that far from the border. It's the same. Working out how to do this for Toronto, Chicago, or Toronto, New York is actually much harder because you're a couple of hours from the border, and there are large cities between you and the border that you need to stop at. So it's that's a tricky question. Of course, the way this also relates to HFR is, until we know what we're doing with HFR in Montreal, we also don't know what we can do about special platforms for Amtrak for customs clearance and all the rest of it. Because, of course, Amtrak wants to bring the Vermont train through as well and have 2 routes, which would be excellent. And it would make it a lot easier to justify the customs facilities if we have more than 1 train a day down into the States. But how are we doing this? Which platforms, or indeed which station, is going to be used for high frequency rail? The whole article on the Transport Action website just sets out some of the possibilities of how you solve a problem like Montreal, and one of them obviously is to use a completely different station, or to build new platforms below the current central station. They're the gold-plated solutions. They're the high-cost solutions. There are also ways you can do it a minimal build or no build now, get it going, and then worry about that later. I mean, that's kind of, in my opinion, be the sensible way to do it. Let's start delivering on some of these promises now, and the better, and then upgrade later for things that are going to be really hard, like building a new tunnel in Montreal.
And just sorry, just so quick, where Montreal Station should be a true station, in my opinion, not whatever plan is done in the long term. If you do Ottawa to Quebec City, you spend about 30-40 minutes also there. That's low, it's not a low-hanging fruit because you need to build a whole new station, but I think that's a really great example of some of the challenges that comes with the whole Montreal, particularly in Toronto. That's the big choke points of the whole corridor, because if we're able to address those issues and or at least try to reduce the impact they have on the level of service that can be offered, there's really a possibility to not even just add more trains in the first place, but actually get a reliable service and predict and dependable service for customers. Because if you have the expectation that your train's going to be late, I don't recall what's the last numbers for the corridor, but let's say I'll just pitch a number there. 25% of the trains are late, more than 30 minutes late. That it discourages customers that rely on the time, getting somewhere on time, and it's really low-hanging fruit to get people to take the train more reliably. Is if it's not on time, why would you care? Yeah, sorry, Shane, I kind of cut you there.
That's okay. So Terry, I know you have to go in a few minutes. Do you have time to answer one more question quickly?
Sure.
Okay. So we'll just go to one more with Terry. So London Oaks Traveler is asking, what is the progress with the old Wolverine International Chicago to Toronto LTD?
So the Amtrak Connects Us plan, which Amtrak has launched, does envisage the reinstatement of service between Chicago and Toronto. And we have had confirmation within the last month or so that yes, VIA Rail is seriously interested, is seriously studying making work. That's good. That's really good, because there was about 6 months when it wasn't clear whether the American interest was being reciprocated on this side of the border. Amtrak's current vision of this is to go through Detroit rather than Port Huron. This is good on the US side because it brings in a major city. On this side, it's complicated because if you want to go from the Detroit-Windsor rail tunnel to the current VIA alignment, you've got to go through the back of Windsor on what is currently freight track, what is currently yard track that serves the auto plants, etc. And that's the way this is currently envisaged. There are 2 really good ways to do this, and this is probably going to be the subject of a report that we're preparing that will follow on from the Southwest Ontario transportation strategy that the provincial government is working on, and say, okay, what's the next level beyond this? Either you can dust off the work that was done by David Collinet and the high-speed rail team in Ontario and say, right, between London and Windsor, We're going to switch at Chatham to the CP alignment, avoid a lot of grade crossings going into Windsor. We're going to line up straight to the tunnel. You're going to have a new VIA station in Windsor that happens to be really close to the university and the college, and actually is quite useful, and is also closer to downtown. And then we're going to be able to go straight through. That requires a lot of initiative on this side of the border to retool that. But if we're talking high frequency rail all the way to Windsor, which in fact Omar Al-Ghabra did in July last year, say, yeah, let's do this. That's a really good way to do it, because you can really up the speed. You have an almost straight alignment all the way from London to Windsor. And
it's relatively flat on top of that. Like, yeah. It's not difficult terrain to work with. Like,
no, it's very it could be done. That part of the Ontario High Speed Rail proposal actually works really well. It was the part where you tried to cut across Oxford County through a lot of fields with a completely new alignment that did not work well, and which is what that was the reason the thing got cancelled. The other way to potentially do this is if you're going through the Detroit New Centre station that already exists, heading up the river to Port Huron, coming across at Port Huron, cutting to London that way. This means you've got Detroit. It's not actually time-wise a lot longer to do that. It's a relatively lightly used CN line between Detroit and Port Huron that you'd be using, rather than the main CN route across Michigan that the Amtrak Blue Water train uses. It creates a new connection on the US side. To make this work on our side of the border, you need to put the second track back between Stratford. Not Stratford, Sarnia and London. But we would argue you need to do that anyway. It's become an absolutely ridiculous bottleneck for freight, which pushes a lot of freight meets onto the Dundas subdivision, which then creates a ridiculous bottleneck for passengers, the Dundas being London to Toronto. If you can actually decongest that by putting the second track back to Sarnia, it's a lot cheaper to do it that way than to try and put a third track down where there didn't used to be a track before. And again, it's like, what is the biggest win-win? Passenger and freight are not enemies any more than the driver and the cyclist are not enemies, they're neighbors. We need to make things that work for everybody.
That's very well said, Terry. So, thank you again for joining us and providing your insight, your commentary, your thoughts on these very important topics, especially at this point in time and juncture of passenger rail in Canada. So Terry Johnson, Transport Action Canada, thank you again, and wish you...
Thank you, Shane. Thank you, David. Pleasure speaking with you.
A real pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Terry. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, so we're going to keep talking here. So if people have any further questions, please feel free to add it into the chat down below. If not, we can always, David, if you're cool with that, we can always talk about one of our favorite topics, the Montreal Metro, the Ottawa O train, or the Montreal Réseau Express Métropolitain.
I feel like we haven't talked about the REM that much lately, like especially with the news that it's again delayed, but at least we have some. I guess on the bright side now we know is that we're gonna hopefully have something to go see open in 2022. The segment between Gare Centrale and my God, what's it? Distrant? What do they call that? Oh boy, I'm blanking out. The South Shore Bridge, basically. Hopefully that will be, I think, unfortunately, the only opening we're going to get, because we got Stage 2 South in Ottawa delayed. We have also Crosstown, obviously, that's we're way out. So I think for me the more worrying part is that they're at this point 2024 at the earliest for the branch to the Montreal Tunnel. I think that shows there was a lot of kind of connects a bit with HFR in that sense, but I think there was a lot of hubris in the CDPQ thinking they could handle their project on their own. And I think, like, I know a lot of the risk is a bit external to them in the sense that the tunnel was built more than 100 years ago, but it's also reality that it's they took on the risk by themselves. I think if there was a perfect time to build a second tunnel, it was when HFR actually was brought forward. It could have been coordinated with between VIA Rail and CDPQ to actually build a second tunnel that could support the operations of both rail networks. But hey, we are trying to fix that tunnel again.
And there's already a lot of work involved in that. So these next two questions, David, I'll defer to you to give a brief answer on them, because I'm not totally familiar with this. So what about a Joliette, Shawinigan, Trois-Rivières, Quebec train once HFR is in place?
So Trois-Rivières is definitely on the map for HFR. At least I see it's on the map for HFR, but I should more use the possibly on the map argument. Shawinigan is nowhere to be seen. I don't recall where the trackage is exactly that they and someone would have to probably jump in on that if they know the chat. But basically, we're kind of stuck with the situation that there's a long gap between de la Concorde and Trois-Rivières for the stop. So Joliette could have a stop. Shawinigan could possibly be a stop at it, but I don't think it's within the scope of what's being discussed at least as of right now. And that's a big part of the whole HFR question, is that a lot of things are up to the private partner. So I don't want to go in procurement, discuss procurement too much at this point. I don't feel I'm the most qualified person to discuss this, but essentially at this point, what we're doing is we're seeing if there's interest by a private partner to participate in the development of HFR. Once that's done, they're basically going to do an RFQ. So check for right now, what they're trying to see is if there's an interest. Afterwards, we're going to get to see if there's qualified people that are still interested, and then we're going to get them to propose an idea. And then for 3 years after that, we're going to develop the project with them. So the scope could change, the scope, the timelines, the costs, and at that point, there's still no shovel in the ground. Just be clear, realistically, we're not talking a shovel in the ground before 2026, 2028, based on the current proposed timeline. That's assuming no delays. And for anyone that's been following VIA Rail, I think we're well aware that we could expect delays, and that's assuming the upcoming government, whoever it is, because that possibly 2 election cycles, depending on the kind of government we get in the next elections. But
we could have an unfavorable government jump in and sort of hit
just
the
kill it on
pause
the spot,
or the reset, and then what seemed like 5-10 years from now could turn into 15-20 very, very quickly. So obviously what needs to happen at this point is really need to citizens, advocacy groups, and engage with the government, engage with VIA Rail, and see what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what do people really want. Do you want to just hand it off and save a couple taxpayers' dollars for a service that is ultimately not going to see its true potential because the ridership is going to be very low? Or are we going to do something properly, even if it costs more, which should always be, if you're going to do something, the old adage is, if you're going to do it right.
Yes.
And
doing it right doesn't mean doing it all at once, though. And that's, I think, something that we're forgetting in all that, is we're willing to throw probably 12, 15, maybe $20 billion to build essentially what would be considered regular passenger rail in most of Europe. We're not talking 4 to 6 billion. We're talking potentially 20 billion for 1,000 kilometers. That's about 20 million per kilometer, of electrified track. We're getting more and more towards a price range of high-speed rail. But as you say, there's no real plan. There is a plan. There's a procurement plan. That's all we have right now. There's studies. They don't want to share them. The government's been more opaque about that than a lot of topics, and it's disheartening because it's going to affect the livelihood, first of all, of a lot of people that actually work for VIA Rail, but also for the users and the communities that's going to be serviced by our service right now by VIA Rail, because a lot of it is on the table to grab by the private sector. it's privatization. Like I hate to say it, but it's privatization. It's not even a franchise model like you see, like they tried in the UK. It's pure privatization because we give them the right to dictate how they will operate and how they will operate the other service, the local services. So like they design, they do the final design, they construct, they maintain, they operate, they do the revenue, and in the meantime, we as the taxpayers, we end up basically either covering their costs if they're not as profitable as they hope to be, as they said they will be, or we end up just getting whatever is left after they take their share as agreed on the contract. Coming back to the original question for Shawinigan, Joliette, Trois-Rivières, the scope is as, like, to put it in one sentence, is it's a project with no real scope. It's a project that says we want to improve passenger rail by increasing frequency, speeds, electrification. That's all. That's all we can definitely see that we know about HFR, because even the location of the stations is up for debate at this point. The private partner could decide not to use Union Station in Toronto. They could decide not to use Bonaventure in Montreal. They could decide not to use Gare Palais in Quebec City. As far as they're concerned, they could decide to build another station further up, just so not to need to do the tracks that far up. Mm-hmm. So, or they could, and I think like we have some amazing assets with those stations, because especially Bonaventure, which is now going to have, it has the green line.
No, the orange line.
Yeah, sorry, orange. My God. That's not something I should be blanking out on.
Yeah, it has the orange line on the metro, the
yes.
RAM,
and there's a few exo trains, but I mean, not that many anymore. VIA Rail, like it's downtown. It's as
and it's got a Tim Hortons and a pastry shop in there to die for.
Yes, and
oof, very good.
Yeah, I tend to be there when it's closed by the time anyway, all this to say that like we're stuck in a project that at first seemed pretty obvious, and the moment, like, why are we not doing it already? Mm-hmm. But the more things go, it's more questionable, and there's less and less transparency, there's less and less outreach in like, I mean, in the end it's politics, because it's going to be it's public funding. Like it's politicians will decide the outcome of the project, but we just end up like stuck in the middle, and there's no one that's really willing to commit, because I know there's someone, I think Jean-François asked if there was if we try to contact the minister. Try to contact him, honestly, like I hate to say it, but it like they haven't, like, Transport Canada on the whole project has been laughable at best. They've given us piecemeal information. They haven't been honest. Like there's been requests for RFOI, so like a request for information that they gave basically redacted documents, or just like you're just better off printing it on like a black sheet of paper that will come out to the same thing. Like there's no disclosure, there's no feedback loop, there's no interest to hear what people have to say, there's no consultation. Mm-hmm. We're just going like we're going down the track that they've decided already what we're doing. But
what is the other thing that it was so for people in Ottawa, for example, just to sort of draw a comparison, the redevelopment of Le Breton Flats.
Yes.
And a few years ago, there was talk of having the, well, not necessarily the Senators, but I mean, who else is going to play?
A sports arena, like right? An event.
A sports arena. And then there was a spat between Eugene Melnick, the former owner, and Rudy, whatever, from Trinity Building Development, something or other, who was building the 60-story building off next to Bayview Station. And one thing led to another. They were going to work together. That fell apart. No more arena. The whole thing got reset. That got delayed. How many years now? Like 2-3 years?
When I moved to Ottawa, there was like that was already on the table at that point, that project.
Yeah.
So that's 2017. So like that's 5 years.
Yeah. So everything got, pardon the language, but screwed big time. And now we're at the point again where we just found out last week that the NCC revealed that, okay, there's a group with the Ottawa Senators part of it. We're going to be building an arena. Okay, we heard this before. We wasted how many years to get to this point again? Now we're going ahead with this. Hopefully there's no more screw ups to stall this again. Like something should get built. This is exactly the same thing with what we see in VIA Rail. We were promised years ago for some action, some improvement. Then we find out a year and a half or 2 years, somewhere around there. The minister, I remember his first announcement was in Quebec City,
Yes.
at the station there. And then he did the little tour and he came to Ottawa and he went to Montreal and he went to Toronto and a little bit here and there in between. And he was very happy. We're going to be building HFR. This is the idea. Here's some drawings of what the routing will look like. And then didn't hear much again for a little while after that. Then this year we hear, well, we're going to be doing a procurement to have some, potentially privatize it. They don't say it like that, but that's essentially the bottom.
No. They if you look in the announcement, there is no word of privatization. Of course not, because they know that the unions, like VIA Rail, I don't recall which union they are part of, most of their employees, but they're all unionized positions at VIA Rail. And I think it's Unifor. I'm not 100% on that, but the moment HFR, like the release, the press release was made to say that they're launching the procurement, they literally flat out called it privatization. It is privatization. Like there's no. I mean, if it quacks like a duck and acts like a duck, it's a duck. Like that's. I'm sorry, but it's a terrible expression. I have that stuck in my mind for some reason, but it's privatization done under the premise of, but in 50 years the track will come back to us. In 50 years it'll be too late to actually do action. 50 years is I'm sorry to say, but it's an eternity in the sense of what we need to do to improve passenger rail and like decarbonize most of transports in Canada. Like it's not time to say, well, in 50 years we could potentially improve the tracks. No, it's time to start be serious and take actions. It doesn't have to cost 20 million. It doesn't have to cost 20 billion to improve things. Like if we go with
if something is pitching something and saying in 50 years we'll be able to, I don't care about 50 years. I'm going to be 90 years old in 50 years. I don't care about that. Obviously, I care about the future and my kids and all that, and their families and all that enjoy. But I mean, what are you going to do for me? We're talking about stuff that's just being pushed back, and we're not seeing any clear action. No plan, no scope. We have no idea what's going to happen. We're going to be essentially we're going to be changing the service on the corridor. That's essentially it. What we know for sure, we're going to be getting new trains. Okay, been there, done that. We know about that. One train is being tested right now. Hopefully by the end of the year, it'll be certified. We'll start seeing that operating, and then we'll see the other 20, 30 some trains showing up over the next couple of years and replacing the legacy LRC coaches and the locomotives and all that. It's going to be stunning trains. They're going to be nice, bi-directional. So there's the locomotive at one end. At the opposite end, at the back, instead of being like a caboose, let's say, it's there's a cab that is pretty much identical to the cab on the locomotive. Yeah. So you can go back and forth. So for people familiar with, let's say, the
Go operates that way nowadays.
Will go, or the Montreal Metro, double-ended. It can go back and forth. There's a operator can set at other end. Toronto Subway, the Ottawa O train, same idea. It simplifies things. Currently, the train has to go through a Y where it has to do like a, not necessarily a complex maneuver, but a time-consuming maneuver to be able to rotate around and come back the other way. So I don't know. I mean, I'm going off on a tangent here, but really hope that we see some proper action, that we stop hearing about idle promises, and that we find out more, at the very least, what is going to happen what are they going to entertain and what are they going to allow to happen? Because I mean, right now it just seems like it went from very exciting and fairly promising to
I was excited for HFR in 2019. I was excited in 2021. Right now, I'm not excited. I'm looking at HFR as a joke. I'm looking at HFR and I'm like, right now, I mean, I'm looking at HFR and I wonder why we're not just going high speed at this point. In 2019, if someone would have mentioned to me, let's build high speed rail between Montreal and Toronto, I would have said, it's not worth the extra money right now. Like, let's build something we can upgrade. Like, let's start by a stepping stone. It's at this point, like, why not just build high speed trains? Like, that's how discouraging the whole thing is. We're not having a discourse that, and in the end, I think myself, Terrence, Shane, and I think like a lot of the Canadian transit / transport groups, what they're saying is not, we don't want HFR canceled. We want to have a rational discussion. We want to have a rational plan that makes sense, something that we can build upon, not just end it off to someone to make a profit for the next 40 years, 50 years. Like it's, and anyway, it's disappointing to say the least.
I mean, what we should see really is if you know, building the whole thing at once, probably not the best idea, because if you do it in segments, then you can, look back at it, lessons learned, things of that nature, and be able to make better informed decisions for the subsequent phases. So if they were to start with, let's say, Ottawa to Montreal, that alone would be a big improvement, because right
that's
now,
a low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's not that low-hanging. It's a relatively big deal, like program.
But yeah, like a 200-kilometer or less run, let's say, and there's a lot of traffic, a lot of people traveling from one city to another. You make it frequent, you make it convenient, because right now, let's say I want to go to Montreal and I want to take public transit to get there. Let's say I take the O train. Service starts sometime shortly after 5 in the morning. I take it to Tremblay Station, and then I take VIA Rail. How many trains are there that goes to Montreal before I get to, like, let's say I have an engagement in Montreal, and then I'm going to be back the same day. There's a point where, how early do I have to leave in the morning to actually make it worthwhile to be there, to then be able to come back?
The latest you can leave Montreal is 7:30 p.m. That's it. So that means, and that's because of the lovely train that comes all the way from Quebec City. I think 7:30 p.m. right now is the latest you can be in Montreal and take a train leaving the same day.
However, since it's coming from so far away, a good chance it could have been delayed or canceled.
Possible. I don't think I've seen that many cancellations between Quebec and Montreal, but like it's definitely one of those that ends up delaying. Like my biggest delay on that train was 1 hour 35 minutes. It was great because for those not in the know with VIA Rail, if the train is delayed more than 30 minutes at your destination or more than an hour, you get a certain percentage back of your previous ticket as a credit you can use on your next booking. You need to do it over the phone or train station. So it worked out that for me, basically, the next trip, I got business class for essentially free compared to economy. But like the difference is I was going to Quebec City to see my family. I was going on vacation. I didn't have to catch a train over there. I didn't have to catch a plane. No one was waiting for me. I was just getting there when I was getting there. If I was going there for a business meeting, like why would I do that? Why would I risk being an hour and a half late for a meeting that's for a meeting or an appointment or something, when I could just fly in? Like, sure, I'll pay twice the amount of money, but relatively speaking, I'll be on time compared to that. But anyway,
and I mean the other point too, like let's say when you go to Montreal, it can be an hour and 35 to an hour and 40-minute train ride from Ottawa to Montreal, or you can drive, and it'll be about 2 hours or a little less.
Yeah, depending on traffic.
Yeah, and what do you get by driving? I mean, I'm not advocating for driving here, but when you think about it, you can leave when you want to go. You can come back when you want to come back. You don't have to follow a schedule. And if you're really crafty, you can go park at, if you're going to be going downtown and you want to make an easier run of your time, you can go park at Station Namur.
Yes.
David's like, I knew Namur was going to come in here at some
I'm like, oh, he's going for Namur, but I don't do Namur anymore.
Okay, but I do.
I do Charlevoix.
But well,
Yeah.
Charlevoix is fun too. But for example, you can park at Namur. You're not even a kilometer from the interchange between the 15 and the 40. So worst case scenario, you're stuck in traffic for 5-10 minutes at most, and then it's smooth sailing after that. Why would somebody take a train that they're going to pay an arm and a leg, especially if you're a family, you're moving a lot of people? I mean, that this sort of falls into the pricing, right? But if you can make it reasonable that you can have a lot of trains running per day, a lot of passengers riding it, maybe the pricing can become more appealing to people, compete with what little bus transportation, intercity motor coach there is, and certainly offer a better, more human, as they like to say, experience than going through an airport where you're, practically treated like, your bag is too heavy. What's in this? Or you shouldn't have brought that. You didn't show up on time. Oh no, your seat's been. Nobody wants to deal with that for a 2-hour or for a 40-minute flight. And you're only going 2 hours away. So the train, it's easy. You get on, you get off. Montreal has a beautiful station. You come up right underneath. The metro's right there. Or if it's a stormy, wintry day, you can take that EZO underneath, connect to all the buildings underneath, pretty much go wherever you want to go. Or if you just want to go and walk around underground in Montreal, you can do it. You never have to set foot outside. Everything is easy. It's smooth.
Yes.
That would be my hope. They can make it. And see, someone pointed out there, VIA also has strict luggage checks in both Ottawa
ID also nowadays.
Worse than airport. Yeah. So, I mean, it's disappointing. Now, somebody else just asked a question. Any rumor on why the VIA CEO departed abruptly is related to HFR? There's not really necessarily a rumor, but probably unhappy with how the HFR thing was going, because it seems to be sort of a backtrack in the past couple months. So I would assume, there hasn't been any official word on that, but I would assume HFR probably has something to do with it, because it seems like, to me, if I was running VIA Rail and, it's a crown corporation, it's still being funded in part by the government. If I was told that we're going to take a different approach to how we're going to implement this, and we're going to be privatized, okay, well, what does that mean for the corporation that I'm working for? Are we even going to be involved in this? Are you pretty much going to take it away from us? And then VIA Rail is just going to be, well, we have the Canadian that goes from the east to the west, which again has an uncertain future, and among other things. I mean, what do you really leave at that point? You leave like a little piecemeal operation, or are you going to leave the trunk line? As most people should know, the corridor is the bread and butter, the meat, the heaviest used part of the VIA Rail network. That's where they make the money. If you take that away, what does that leave for the rest of it? The rest of it already has service that is lacking, doesn't go everywhere, and generally regarded as frequent. And a lot of people say it's fairly poor out there. But when we were getting new trains here, what about the west? What about the west? What about the west? You take off this main part of VIA Rail, where's the money gonna? It doesn't seem like there's much money to do anything out west to begin with. You're gonna leave them with even less, and it's gonna be even less likely. There might even be. It puts the whole thing into such jeopardy, and it puts a lot of uncertainty in us. I'm very uncertain about what's going to happen. I'm sure David is too. Terry sounded very uncertain too. So to the question, what happened with the VIA CEO?
Who
probably was really upset by this. I would have,
so,
if it was me, I would be upset. So, but do we know? No. Is there any rumors other than what I'm saying right now? I mean, it's all just speculation. But I would, if I was in her position, I would have been upset.
I would have really liked to be a fly in the room on that day, like
because I would have been telling about the whole project.
Yes, because I don't believe I don't believe the government itself has faith in HFR. They're just I think for them it's a checkbox that they mark as done or on track to be delivered, just to say that the current government has decided to invest in rails. For Canadians, we spent whatever amount of dollar was the last. I think they put 300 million last time around. And yes, overnight trains definitely. Sorry, I just saw that in the chat. I'm like, yes, thank you. Overnight trains are so misunderstood, and I don't get why we're not doing more of them. And I don't get why some countries like France are trying to get rid of most of them, because if you don't do high-speed trains, you can connect between places relatively quickly. But if you have a slower train that goes overnight, you don't care. You sleep. You wake up. You're at your destination. That's just a part of the marvel of that, in some sense. Sorry, I had to jump on that right away. It's but like yes, overnight trains are, I think, a wonder of. I don't get why there's no service. Like, I think the latest you can. I think it's 10:30 p.m. the latest train that arrives in Ottawa right now. I guess, like, if you had a 10:30, like if you have a train leaving at 10:30 p.m., I think it would even with the track, like, even if it goes slower, it's 6 hours to Quebec City, so like it would be in Quebec City by 4 a.m. But like if you do a Quebec City to Toronto train that like overnight, what was it called? Night Star, I think, or something like that. Anyway, I don't recall the name of the proposals, but like, if we actually invested in some of those like night service, we don't need more equipment. We can literally use the same equipment and just have it run during the night.
Yeah.
Like, of course, you would want maybe cars with sleepers and other things. But like, even with coach service, you could run it overnight. Like, there's no restriction. Like, there's no need for it. It just gives more option to people. Nightjet, yes, Nightjet, RailJet. Like, I mean, anything from OBB at this point has just been a home run. Like, and
anyway. like you said there, you don't need any different equipment. You see it on planes. Do you have a specific type of equipment on a plane when it's doing a long haul overnight for a 10-12 hour flight? No, it's the same plane, it's the same seats. And I'm sure that on a train, it's going to be an even better experience for sleeping.
A red eye is definitely worse than an overnight train. Like, even if you don't have sleepers, like if you have just your classic coach car, like, I mean, you don't need to be a genius to know that there's more space on the train most of the time than on a plane. Like,
well, even there's no turbulence.
There's no turbulence. It's relatively smooth. It's relatively quiet per se. Like, I think it's a much more enjoyable experience overnight versus a red eye for most people. But yeah, like, and like, for example, the Montrealer, like, I think that's a 17-hour train trip. There's in the US, there's the auto train that's offered by Amtrak that goes between just outside of Washington, D.C. to Orlando, Florida. That's 17 hours. It's an overnight train. You leave at 5 p.m., you arrive in the morning in Florida, and you can have your car with you, like that. Yeah. Why would you drive the same length of time on the highway when you can just park your car they park the car in the train for you? You have the coach. You can eat. You can sit. You can work on things. Like, it's all. Of course, you can fly 2 hours, but you don't have your car. You don't have. You still have to sleep at some point. You still have, like, it's anyway. I feel like I'm going on a rant at this point, but we see it. I think there's a lot of ideas, and I think people in Canada care more about the trains than they make it seem. And I think that's the government acts like they act like we don't care. They act like, well, we go with the low-hanging fruit of saying we did something because we can mark it as complete, and we can say, well, we've invested in trains for, like, in passenger rail, we have solved the climate crisis. We're nowhere near that. Like, there's so many easy solutions, like banning plastic straws. Like, I mean, not to get too political or anything like that. Like blending plastic straws is a solution to a problem that's really not the main reason why we're having that problem in the first place. But anyway, that's not the point here.
Oh, that sounds like it sounds like the evening train is about to come through. So it looks like we'll have to let everyone go for this evening.
I didn't expect that. Yeah,
I can see it right now. Their last call there, gate 1. So thank you everyone for joining us. And we have a train to catch. I think you're going to Trois-Rivières. I'm going to Montreal.
I'm not going to Trois-Rivières. Why would I go there?
Okay, no. Quebec City. You're going to
makes
Quebec
more
City.
sense.
So thank you everyone for joining in. Hopefully you've enjoyed this rail chat. We'll be more again in the future. Please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and join us on Discord to have more great discussions on HFR, public transit, and everything else in between. Thank you again, David.
Pleasure as always. Yeah.
And
see you all.
Thank you all. We'll talk again soon. Thanks for watching.